few hours ago, we celebrated the Stations of the Cross, and for centuries, we have always started that. We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross, you have redeemed the world. It is by the cross of Christ that our world has, in fact, been redeemed. That is why we have the audacity to call today Good Friday. The cross is a cruel invention by man to horrendously and excruciatingly crucify others, an instrument of torture and death. Yet it is by your holy cross, O Lord, that you have redeemed the world. It is at this moment, when Christ died on the cross, that absolutely everything changed. Death was conquered, sin was vanquished, and a new and glorified life with God was about to be restored. And we can unpack that a little. I don't know if you've ever meditated with the wounds of Christ in your prayer, whether it's the scourging at the pillar, the crowning with thorns, the nails in his hands and feet, the piercing of the side of his sacred heart. Each of these wounds borne by Christ was done so in order to save us, encountering death so that we may live. I have to admit that I've meditated the most in my own prayer life on the Sacred Heart of Christ and on the crown of thorns. On my chalice that I use for every Mass, it has the pierced hearts of Jesus and Mary, surrounded by the crown of thorns. And it is in that moment that an ocean of love and mercy is being poured out. Wounds that were freely embraced for the sole purpose of God's love. Now, I have not, however, often prayed specifically with the nail wounds of Jesus. Sometimes during the Easter season, in a few weeks, when we have the story of doubting Thomas in 2 or 3 weeks from now, those wounds, then maybe I'll pray on it then, but those wounds have never really been a focus of my prayer, and perhaps it should be. St. Catherine of Siena, one of the great saints in our church, in reflecting on the Passion of the Lord, said, "All the nails in the world could not have held Christ to the cross had love not held him there." It is not the nails that kept Christ attached to the wood of the cross, but it was the most extreme, concrete moment of love in the history of the world. And yet, out of love, he still allowed himself to be nailed to the wood of the cross. One final wound of Christ's passion, which I bring to your attention today, is one that we may not have heard of, actually. It's sometimes called the holy shoulder wound of Christ, because it is the shoulder of Christ that carried the cross. It is his shoulder that bore the weight of the sins of all humanity. Some saints say that was actually the most significant wound that Jesus had throughout his entire passion. St. Bernard of Clairvaux has a beautiful prayer on the sacred wound. Loving Jesus, gentle Lamb of God, I honor that most painful wound of your shoulder, where you bore the heavy cross that tore your flesh and exposed the bones. It caused you more pain than any other wound in your holy body. I adore you, Jesus, and I praise you. I thank you for this most sacred and painful wound, asking you by that searing pain and the burden of the cross to be merciful to me, a sinner. Forgive all of my sins and lead me toward heaven, doing the way of the cross. Today, above all days, is a wonderful time to pray and meditate on the wounds of Christ. For as terrible and awful and horrendous as they are, it is through these wounds that we have been healed, through these wounds that we have been washed clean. Is there a particular wound that speaks to you? Is there one that draws you in? What is it saying to you? I once saw an image that profoundly impacted me, and I've searched for this image again, but have never been able to find it, even with the aid of Google or Siri or the myriad of search engines that are out there. It was a picture of Mary holding Christ after he was taken down from the cross. Not quite the same as Michelangelo's Pietà in Rome, but in this picture, Mary held his head in her lap and was cleaning the wounds. What struck me in particular about this image was the crown of thorns, how it had been removed from the mangled mess of Christ's hair mixed with sweat, blood, and dirt, and was just set aside next to his body. It wasn't thrown away, it wasn't crushed, but almost with great care was preserved by Mary. We talk about the love of Christ and the love of God shown in a unique and remarkable way today. But we should also look at the way that Mary showed the love to her Son, because it is an indication of how we are called to respond to God's love first shown to us when he was crucified. After Jesus had been betrayed, arrested, denied, falsely accused, scourged, mocked, humiliated, beaten, and eventually crucified, through all of it, Mary remained. In John's Passion narrative, which we just proclaimed, Mary stands close by at the foot of the cross. She remains always in close proximity to Jesus when so many others fled and ran away. Intimacy, love, community, faith, hope, and trust, all united in Mary as she remained by the cross. Mary bore so much. She remained undaunted in heroic love, with her eyes and her heart full of pity, anguish, and suffering, and most importantly, with love. Yet she knew what was taking place and why it was taking place. And as she gazed tenderly on the wounds of her Son, she was waiting not for her Son's death, but for the salvation of the world. And so Mary stood there. She did not add anything to the saving power of Christ's death, but was still able to offer herself wholly and entirely for him, something that the rest of humanity would be able to imitate in our own individual lives, to make our own lives a witness, an offering to God. If you want to grow closer to Christ, if you want to understand the true agony of the cross, go through Mary. It is a tried and true method. Pope Francis, early on in his papacy, wrote this beautiful prayer to Mary: Mother of our faith, help us entrust ourselves fully to him and to believe in his love, especially at times of trial beneath the shadow of the cross, when our faith is called to mature. Because of what took place on Calvary that very first Good Friday, with the passion and death of Christ, with the wounds he bore, with the cross he carried, and with the presence of his sorrowful mother along the entire journey, we can go forward with confidence and trust. We know where to place our hope. Many of us may have felt that we have stood under the shadow of the cross many times in our lives, perhaps especially over this past year. And honestly, standing in the shadow of the cross is not a bad place to be, because while we are there, we can stand united with our Blessed Mother. We can gaze upon the heart of her Son, and with true faith and devotion, and with conviction, we can say, "We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world."